Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to my third conversation on disentangling patriarchy. And I'm so excited to have my good friend, Amy Ziering, here with me today. Amy Ziering is an Oscar-nominated and two-time Emmy and Peabody award-winning investigative filmmaker whose groundbreaking documentaries have single-handedly transformed and shaped our culture. Amy's work includes Not So Pretty, which is a four-part original investigative expose of the cosmetic industry that led to Johnson & Johnson removing products off the shelves. Alan v. Farrow, which was on HBO, that is a 7-time Emmy-nominated series examining the accusations of sexual abuse against Woody Allen by Dylan, his daughter, with Mia Farrow. On the Record, which was in 2020, a searing examination of the unique plight women of color face in the wake of assault crimes. The Oscar-nominated The Invisible War, which broke the story of the epidemic of rape in the US military and led to 5 congressional hearings and the passing of 35 reforms through Congress. That is a lot of reforms. The Hunting Ground, an expose of the epidemic of sexual assault on college campuses that igniting sweeping policy reforms at hundreds of institutions. And The Bleeding Edge, the first ever comprehensive critique of medical device industry's corruption. I can't say the word.
Malfeasance.
Compelling industry giant pair to remove a harm device from the market and catalyzing a worldwide debate about regulation and patient safety. That was embarrassing. Ziering also co-directed and produced the award-winning Derrida, a complex portrait of the world-renowned French philosopher, father of deconstruction. And other films include Outrage, an expose of closeted politicians who actively legislate against LGBTQI rights. It was nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Investigative Journalism. Her company, called Jane Doe Films, has a motto, which is "We don't make films, we make history." And that has proven true, as Ziering's work has directly led to the penning and passing of 35 pieces of legislation, shifts in military policy, and removal of dangerous products off our shelves. It's a big deal. So it's really rare for a filmmaker to make a film that actually makes transformative change. I mean, I think a lot of films make cultural transformations, but to actually change policy is a big deal. And that is somehow Amy's films really motivate legislators and politicians to act. And that is a really rare thing. So we're going to talk briefly about 2 films in particular, a little bit about The Hunting Ground, which, as I said, was an expose of rape culture on college campuses, and it changed the policies of dozens of states and hundreds of colleges. And after watching The Hunting Ground, Senators Kirsten Gillibrand and Claire McCaskill pushed a bipartisan bill to reform sexual assault on campuses, and also The Invisible War, about the epidemic rape in the US military. And Amy got the film to Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta, and immediately after seeing the film, he announced significant policy changes. And what I want to talk to you about those particular films about sexual assault was about the structures, of the military and college campuses, or Harvard Law School, if you want to talk about that. What is it about these sort of structures that allow, first of all, silence women and make it very difficult for women to come forward and tell their stories? And what is it about this structure you think that may lead to possibly these epidemics of assault?
Well, first, thanks, Jill, for having me.
You're so professional.
It's funny. I've known Jill since childhood, so it's interesting to have our paths appear in this way. But and I love all your work you're doing on the patriarchy, and I really appreciate your voice, and you're using your privilege and platform to amplify these important causes and making a mark in your own way. I want to acknowledge that. Yeah, what was really interesting, should I look there or you?
I think we look a little bit.
So what was really, I have no 1 degree relationship to the issue of sexual assault. And I just sort of fell into it through a long story we don't have time for. But what was, I think, so inaugural about our films was that we were the first to put this issue on the map as one that's systemically supported and endemically embedded. Typically, our culture likes to think of these crimes as one-offs, and it's just, you have to just eliminate the perpetrator and then, the problems will be resolved. But what we tried to do through our research and our own, investigative work, and I didn't know any better before I started this work, was to find out, oh, actually, it's a whole structure that supports and enables these crimes to be perpetrated with impunity over and over and over again. And as what you want to connect it to is, it's not just any structure, it's an inherently patriarchal structure. Misogyny is part and parcel to and endemic to these institutions in a very ingrained and unconscious way. And that informs so many things, which is why I like you're using this continuum metaphor of needing to disentangle, because we tend to think of patriarchy as just a guy in power, but it's all of these other really insidious and kind of cancerous tumors
Exactly.
that grow from it. So now to make more concrete and specific to your question.
Like the military, let's start.
Like the military. So what happens is certain institutions, if they are patriarchally informed, right, they come in with an inherent bias against women, unconscious and conscious. And one of those biases that we all struggle with is, we're not paid as much. We tend to not be believed when we say something. You see that, I saw that in the medical profession. So our testimonies and our word don't have the same currency or power. We're not obviously treated as equitably or believed to be equitable. We're not given the same privileges, or we don't have the same sense of entitlement. And that's going to come back when you said you want to talk about the culture more at large. So there's all these things that sort of work against women in the military from the get-go. But what happens is when you have a structure like the military, and you have, okay, so then the other thing I'll say is it's not most men, it's predominantly a male crime, that commit these crimes. It's just a small number.
Right.
But if they're allowed to be embedded in these institutions, and these institutions are unable to view these crimes unbiasedly and adjudicate them appropriately, one person can commit these crimes over and over and over and over and over again with impunity and get better at it. It's actually a good.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Oh.
So you were talking about someone yesterday, but predators have a distinct MO, and it's kind of like a great training ground for them, honestly. So, because, they'll succeed, and then they can refine their tactics and improve them and improve them and improve them. And so it becomes harder and harder actually to even, detect. And they're very, very good at decimating their subjects.
Blaming the victim.
And blaming the victim, yeah. So, I mean, it's so, okay, so we can talk about the ways in which, there's all different threads to this. So the perpetrator finds themselves in a structure like in the Vatican. I mean, you can talk about Catholic Church and sexual abuse, all these institutions, right? So just extrapolate from there. So you've got the military, you've got the campuses, and you have a perpetrator embedded. More often than not, it's a male. More often than not, they actually, at least in the military, they test higher. So they're more intelligent than the normal population as well. And why is that significant? It's significant because if you're a commander and you need all your good soldiers and your best soldiers, your high performing soldier, you're not going to be inclined to get rid of. Especially if you hear a complaint about them, right? You need that.
You need them, yeah.
And he's smarter and he's better. And you're not so sure about actually what really took place, because of our rape myth and our rape culture. So you're more inclined, obviously, to give the guy the benefit of the doubt and, dishonorably and discharge the woman, for making stories up, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't know if this is this.
And one of the things you talked about was how they report to their immediate, the officer in charge of them. They would have
the problem with the military, it's different in all different institutions, but the problem with the military, but somewhat, is that you have to, the reporting, the way that they insist that unit cohesion happens is if the commander's fully in charge of all elements. So if anything happens, it goes up through the chain of command to your commander. And the problem with that is the commander, as I said, might have an inherent bias towards the male soldiers, first of all, just because of ingrained unconscious misogyny, will definitely have a bias towards higher performing soldiers. And you've also got a perpetrator who understands, the ways of he can groom his subjects and go on, and perpetrate his crimes to be less detected. So, the commander's kind of got a lot going against him to be able to be completely unbiased in looking at the crime and adjudicating it appropriately. It's a constant conflict of interest.
Right. And that's similar to college campuses too, where the college campuses, or particularly Yale Law School, have a reason they want to keep these things hushed up. It's not advantageous for them to believe the victims. Isn't that true?
Well, they certainly want their numbers down, but I think it's more unconscious than that. But also, just to go back to campuses and military, what's crazy about those places is that they're target-rich environments, right? It's a transient population, it's a young population. There's a lot of turnover and people coming in and out, right? And
you're relating college campuses
to the military.
Okay.
So that there's a lot of opportunities for fraternizing and socializing on these institutions, right? Because you eat and drink and sleep with people, and da 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 da. It's easier for a serial predator to embed and keep doing these crimes over and over again.
Right. Now, if we move on a little bit to college campuses, it's been going on at college campuses for obviously a long time. After your film, people became aware of it. How did the film transform life at college? What is the way that the reporting, or how can that change? What is the ways that can be?
Oh, I think that's a very tough one. I think they have to take the adjudication of the crimes, like we did with the military. We were very emphatic that you have to take the crimes outside the chain of command. So there's some hope for an unbiased investigative process. I think the same with campuses. There has to be some independent investigative body. I mean, it's crazy. Campuses are not equipped to adjudicate felonies, and yet that's what they're right now doing. And they sometimes have students form a committee. The other thing I want to say about this, which is, let's talk about rape myths, because that's a lot of the patriarchy too. So a huge rape myth is it's he said, she said, right? All of us think, oh, it's he said, she said. And so we just can never really know. Well, when you think about that, all crimes are he said, she said.
Right.
Does any criminal say, I did it? Lock me up. But why is this the only crime we sit there and go, it's he said, she said, we just can't figure it out?
Right. And you said that, what is that? It's like 3% or something? What is that?
Yes. Then the other huge stunning statistic is it's 97% of the time when anyone reports a felony, they're telling the truth. Any felony. So that means 3% of the time when someone reports a felony, they're lying. And yet rape is the only felony where the second you report it, someone says, well, I'm not so sure. We have to question her. We have to put her, if they don't sit there and say, are you sure you didn't give him your television set? Or what were you wearing when the robber took your television set? Are you sure you didn't maybe never buy a television set? But it's as unlikely for that person to be making up this crime happened in their apartment as it is for someone to
be. No reason to make that.
No reason. And it's actually, it's even more than that. It's not only do you have no reason, it's so brutal and embarrassing that you wouldn't, this was an interesting anecdote one prosecutor told me. She was prosecuting men who had assaulted their prostitutes, Johns who had assaulted their prostitutes. And she was failing. There was no convictions. They were always siding with the Johns. So she was like dumbfounded, And so she took her jurors into a room one day and she looked at all of them and she said, everyone sit down and close your eyes. I want you all to think about the best sexual experience you all have ever had. Okay, close your eyes and think about it. Okay, you got it? Okay. Now open your eyes. Now who wants to raise their hand and tell me about it? Tell us all about it. Like none of the jurors raised their hands. And she was like, why do you think then that my client would come here and go through a horrible sexual experience and have to describe it in graphic detail over and over again if none of you even want to share among strangers a good sexual experience? Right. Like that's what I'm saying. Like, it's so funny that people think people would just make this up or do it for attention. It's so painful. It's so shameful. It's so horrible that actually it's a story you're more loath to tell than want to, So that always stuck with me.
And that does remind me of the Woody Allen movie and On the Record, which are both films where people it's very hard for people to come out and tell their stories. One is, well, you can go into.
Well, On the Record was interesting. I mean, we've kind of fell into that just because, I mean, I thought I knew a lot about sexual assault, but talking about my own blindness and talking about entanglements, what white women go through is categorically different than what women of color go through. And I found that out anecdotally in making The Hunting Ground and Invisible War, because it was very, very hard, especially in The Hunting Ground, to get women of color, Asian women, to speak on camera because of, they were like, we want to talk to you, but we're so afraid of the blowback and the cultural mores and the prejudices against us already that we don't even have the place to speak in a film, if that makes sense. But so with On the Record, we actually then decided to focus on this issue. And yeah, I mean, women of color are so disempowered to begin with that it's think about the hurdle. If you think about the hurdles white women go through reporting these crimes, it's unimaginably compounded if you're a person of color. And then the other thing that On the Record really, really, tried to unpack and expose was how, because of the prejudices against Black people in our culture, the thought of a woman coming forward and accusing a Black man is thought of as a communal betrayal, especially because there's rape mythologies about Black men raping people. So just the thought, for a Black woman, if she's raped, by a Black man, it's like inconceivable coming forward, because she doesn't want to, she wants to honor herself, but then she doesn't want to, feed a culture that's already putting targets on Black men's backs and falsely accusing them of rape. So it's this, it's such a mind fuck. It was inconceivable. So I suggest, if you haven't, anyone, On the Record was so revelatory for me, and
it's a great film.
It's
available on, it's on HBO.
It's on HBO
HBO.
Max, or whatever they call it now. They just changed their name to Max, I think. But yeah, so yeah, On the Record really talks about how this issue is even more magnified and compounded. And that also talks about the workplace as an institution that embeds. So we also didn't talk about the imbalance of power. You also have, in the military, you have imbalances of power with, a unit leader, a unit, could, or a higher ranked soldier could perpetrate these crimes against a lower ranked soldier. Same within a college community. Often we would see higher ranking classmen taking advantage of really naive freshmen and knowing how to maneuver this system, and so that so it's an imbalance of power. Same in the workplace. We often see, workplace abuses are often, you see it, Harvey Weinstein, complete imbalances of power, where the person finds himself in a situation, doesn't really know how to navigate because they fear retribution, and then there's this culture of enabling around the perpetrator because they're so powerful.
Right, and that is true of incest as well, obviously. We had one person who's.
Oh, well, the Woody Allen, that was really unpacking another set. I mean, for us, it was